Pontius Pilate is a historical figure who appears in the Holy Scriptures at a crucial and determining moment for biblical events. He played a direct role in the trial and condemnation of Jesus Christ, becoming a name remembered to this day. His involvement in the decision to release Barabbas, a feared criminal, instead of Jesus, marked his reputation, especially because he knew the accusations against Christ were unfounded. Even after his wife had a disturbing dream and advised him not to interfere, Pilate gave in to popular pressure and handed Jesus over to crucifixion. His gesture of washing his hands symbolized his attempt to exempt himself from responsibility for this unjust sentence. But who really was this man? How did he come to power? What led to his fateful decision, and what were the consequences of his actions? Stay with me until the end of this study, because Pilate's story is more intriguing than you might think. In the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was at the height of its expansion, consolidating its dominance over countless peoples and cultures. With its influence stretching from Western Europe to the Middle East, Rome imposed its authority with overwhelming force, crushing revolts and assimilating territories into its power structure. It was in this context that Pontius Pilate emerged as a prominent figure. Appointed by Emperor Tiberius, he governed the province of Judea between 26 and 36 AD, being responsible for administering a strategic region of great geopolitical value. Judea was located in the east of the Mediterranean Sea, functioning as a vital link for trade and maritime transport at the time. However, the Roman presence in Judea was an unbearable burden for the Jewish population. Unlike other peoples subjugated by Rome, the Jews had a deeply rooted religious and cultural identity, rejecting any attempt at foreign domination. The imposition of Roman culture, marked by polytheism and idolatry, clashed violently with the monotheistic faith of the Jews, making the relationship between Roman rulers and the local population increasingly tense. The climate of dissatisfaction and revolt was constant, and Pilate, upon assuming the role of governor, faced an explosive situation. His government was marked by a relentless stance and a succession of decisions that only further inflamed the population's spirits. Known for his rigidity and unpopularity, Pilate ruled with an iron fist, determined to maintain Roman rule over the region at any cost. Pontius Pilate, upon assuming the government of Judea, received broad powers, acting as the strong arm of the Roman Empire in that region. Not only was he responsible for maintaining public order and overseeing tax collection, but he also had the authority to suppress any uprising that threatened Roman sovereignty. However, his administration quickly became one of the most troubled periods in local history. From the beginning of his term, Pilate demonstrated an inflexible stance, insensitive to Jewish traditions and willing to impose Roman rule with implacable severity. One of the most controversial episodes of his government was the decision to use resources from the Jerusalem temple to finance the construction of an aqueduct. For Jews, the temple was sacred, and any diversion of its funds for secular purposes was seen as an unacceptable affront. The result was a wave of protests and revolts, to which Pilate responded with brutal repression. Roman troops were sent to disperse the protesters, and reports indicate that many people were arrested or executed as a form of intimidation. This episode consolidated his reputation as a ruthless leader without any consideration for the beliefs and culture of the people he governed. Furthermore, historical records, such as the writings of Philo of Alexandria, describe Pilate as a man of inflexible, stubborn, and cruel temperament. He ruled with an iron fist, ignoring the pleas of local religious leaders and adopting increasingly repressive measures to ensure control of the province. This behavior, far from pacifying the region, only increased the resentment of the Jewish people against Roman rule and its figure as governor. The most decisive and tragic moment in Pontius Pilate's life was his direct participation in the condemnation of Jesus Christ, an event that would forever change the history of humanity. After being arrested on charges of blasphemy and proclaiming himself King of the Jews, Jesus was taken to Pilate to decide his fate. Faced with pressure from Jewish religious authorities and an angry mob, Pilate found himself faced with a dilemma that would test his character and morality. The Gospels present different perspectives on his role in this episode. Matthew portrays a hesitant Pilate who recognized Jesus' innocence and was warned by his wife about a disturbing dream he had regarding the Messiah, advising him not to get involved in his condemnation. Mark emphasizes his effort to free Jesus from the maximum sentence, questioning the crowd about what crime he had committed. Luke highlights his attempt to escape responsibility by sending Jesus to be tried by Herod Antipas, who, in turn, returned the decision to the Roman governor. In John's Gospel, Pilate appears more cynical and defiant, interrogating Jesus about his kingship and ridiculing his claim that he came into the world to testify to the truth. Even though he recognized that Jesus was innocent, Pilate gave in to popular pressure and made the most fateful decision of his life. He handed him over to be crucified. As a last gesture to demonstrate his supposed neutrality, he washed his hands in front of the crowd, symbolizing that he was not responsible for that injustice. However, his attempt to escape the guilt was in vain. His name would be eternally linked to the trial and execution of Christ, a weight that would accompany him until the end of his life. Faced with an angry crowd and religious leaders who demanded Jesus' condemnation, Pilate found himself trapped in a dilemma of major proportions. He knew that Jesus was innocent and posed no threat to the Roman Empire, but he feared that his decision would trigger a revolt among the Jews, which could compromise his position as governor. Although he had the absolute power to free him, he chose not to directly confront the angry mob in an attempt to avoid a tragic outcome. Pilate followed Easter tradition by offering the people the choice of releasing a prisoner. Faced with the options presented, Jesus or Barabbas, a dangerous criminal, the crowd, encouraged by religious leaders, called for Barabbas' release. Pilate, hesitant and pressured, gave in to the popular will, thus sealing the fate of Christ. At the height of his political cowardice, Pilate took a theatrical stance. He washed his hands in front of the crowd, in a symbolic gesture of apparent exemption from guilt. With this action, he tried to transfer all responsibility for Jesus' innocent blood to the Jewish people, as if a simple ritual could erase their complicity in the condemnation of the Son of God. However, his name was forever associated with this episode of injustice and moral weakness, consolidating his image as a leader who preferred to preserve his position rather than follow his conscience. After the crucifixion, Pilate remained at the head of the Judean government, but his reputation was ruined. His every decision was viewed with suspicion, and his authority was constantly challenged. Seeking to reassert his control, he ordered a violent repression against a group of Galileans and Samaritans, an act of brutality that further increased the revolt against him. His name became associated with tyranny, and complaints against his government reached the emperor himself. Eventually, Pilate was called back to Rome to provide clarification. With the death of Tiberius, Caligula assumed the throne and, with no interest in protecting Pilate, exiled him to Gaul, a distant and cold land, where the once powerful governor fell into oblivion. Away from politics, humiliated and without prospects, he would have been consumed by regret and, according to some traditions, took his own life. Thus ended the trajectory of a man who had the opportunity to change his destiny, but he chose fear and expediency over truth and justice. Pilate had before him a choice that would define his history and his eternity. Faced with incarnate truth, he opted for expediency, choosing to please the crowd rather than defend justice. His fear of losing power and his hesitation in making the right decision made him a symbol of human weakness in the face of social pressure. His name was forever linked to the betrayal of truth, a living testimony to how indecision can lead to irreversible consequences. Jesus, however, had already been predestined to fulfill his purpose, and Pilate's choice did not change the divine plan. But her story serves as a reminder that our decisions have eternal consequences. Today, each of us is also faced with the choice of whether or not to recognize the truth of Christ. How do you see it? As just a historical character, or as the Son of God who came into the world to save humanity? Your decision may not change the reality of who Christ is, but it will certainly define your eternal destiny. May this reflection inspire your spiritual journey. If you like this content, share it with your friends and family. May God bless you greatly.